Translation: If one cherishes pure loving devotion to me, thinking of me as his son, his friend, or his beloved, regarding himself as great and considering me his equal or inferior, I become subordinate to him. So, in this verse, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is sort of paraphrasing the intent of the Lord. So, in other words, whatever Krishnadas Kaviraj, whenever he, as the spiritual master, is considered the external representation of the Supersoul. So, Krishnadas Kaviraj is simply saying what Krishna would have him say, or what Lord Chaitanya in this case would have him say. So he's explaining how he prefers someone treating him as a friend or as beloved, and taking a position either as equal or inferior, that Krishna or Lord Chaitanya, Krishna in this case, taking a position equal to or inferior to his devotee. So that's what he likes. That's what he relishes. So we'll read the purport. It's obviously a very high sentiment, and it shouldn't be imitated. Very dangerous to imitate. As they say, familiarity breeds contempt. So in the neophyte stage of devotional service, we serve with awe and reverence initially. Then when we're sufficiently purified, then revelation may come how to behave with Krishna in a different way. But it shouldn't be imitated. It shouldn't be faked. That's a very dangerous tendency called sahajya tendency. Prabhupada warned against this repeatedly in his purports and in his conversations, talks, to not try to imitate the high sentiments of highly elevated Vaishnavas, but simply to try to render service to such Vaishnavas. Purport: In Chaitanya Charitamrita, 3 kinds of devotional service are described, namely bhakti, ordinary devotional service, Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotional service, and Vidha Bhakti, mixed devotional service. When devotional service is executed with some material purpose, involving fruitive activities, mental speculations, or mystic yoga, it is called mixed or adulterated devotional service. Besides Bhakti Yoga, Bhagavad Gita also describes Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga. Yoga means linking with the Supreme Lord, which is possible only through devotion. Fruitive activities ending in devotional service, philosophical speculation ending in devotional service, and the practice of mysticism ending in devotional service are known respectively as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga. But such devotional service is adulterated by the 3 kinds of material activities. For those grossly engaged in identifying the body as the self, pious activity or Karma Yoga is recommended. For those who identify the mind with the self, philosophical speculation or Jnana Yoga is recommended. But devotees standing on the spiritual platform have no need of such material conceptions of adulterated devotion. Adulterated devotional service does not directly aim for love of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, service performed strictly in conformity with the revealed scriptures is better than such vidhi bhakti, because it is free from all kinds of material contamination. It is executed in Krishna consciousness solely to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Those who are spontaneously devoted to the Lord and have no aims for material gain are called attracted devotees. They are spontaneously attracted to the service of the Lord, and they follow in the footsteps of self-realized souls. Their pure devotion, Shuddha Bhakti, manifested from pure love of Godhead, surpasses the regulative principles of the authoritative scriptures. Sometimes loving ecstasy transcends regulative principles. Such ecstasy, however, is completely on the spiritual platform and cannot be imitated. The regulative principles help ordinary devotees rise to the stage of perfect love of Godhead. Pure love for Krishna is the perfection of pure devotion, and pure devotional service is identical with spontaneous devotional service. Flawless execution of regulative principles is exhibited in the Vaikuntha planets. By strictly executing these principles, one can be elevated to the Vaikuntha planets, but spontaneous, pure, loving service is found in Krishna Loka alone. So this is a very nice purport on a very deep topic. Generally speaking, it describes here three kinds of devotional service. Bhakti, and Prabhupada says ordinary devotional service, so someone may first raise the question, well, what does that mean? How could it be ordinary? In this case, this describes the kind of devotional service which follows the path of strictly executing all the regulative principles of devotional service and ultimately comes to the point of what we call the Vaikuntha standard of devotion. So the devotees in Vaikuntha, they are always worshiping Krishna in awe and reverence in the mood of servitude. That is their constitutional position, always seeing the Lord as the Supreme Lord and serving Him with great awe and reverence. So this is, although it seems strange to use the word ordinary to describe such an exalted state, this means that it is not of the standard of Goloka Vrindavan. That standard is called Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotional service. It means that service which erupts spontaneously within the heart. And as Krishna is describing here through the mouth of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, saying if someone regards himself as great, considering me his equal or inferior, I become subordinate to him. So Krishna is only conquered by this sort of very deep affection and spontaneous love. This is what appeals to Krishna. So that is the Shuddha Bhakti, or pure devotional service platform. And the third category, Vidha Bhakti, mixed devotional service. So, mixed devotional service means devotional service that is still contaminated by the three modes of material nature. And this, of course, is what most of us, I would not apply it to all of you, of course. Someone here may not be struggling under the conditioning of the three modes of material nature. But for the most part, in the beginning stages, most people are executing devotional service very much influenced by the modes of nature. And devotees, this is very elaborately discussed and described in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in the instructions of Lord Kapila to his mother, Devahuti. So, here, Prabhupada describes these devotees that are on the highest platform. Says they're spontaneously attracted to the service of the Lord, and they follow in the footsteps of self-realized souls. And this surpasses the regulative principles of the authoritative scriptures. Sometimes loving ecstasy transcends regulative principles. So this is the standard of the Shuddha Bhaktas. So since that hasn't got a whole lot to do with me, and perhaps some of you may feel it doesn't have a whole lot to do with you, I want to read some descriptions of the other kind of this Vriddhi Bhakti. See if I got that right. Yes, Vriddha Bhakti. Mixed devotional service. So we can maybe get a grasp of where we are and what we need to do. This is from the third canto, 29th chapter, the text 8. translation, devotional service executed by a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry, and who is a separatist, is considered to be in the mode of darkness. So sometimes someone takes up Krishna consciousness, but they are dragging a certain kind of conditioning to that practice. And here it says a person who is envious, proud, violent, and angry. And he's described here as bhinna, a separate or a separatist, which we'll explain more about later. But that's generally our position, is that we're separatists. And that'll be more clearly defined shortly. In the purport, Prabhupada writes, "It has already been stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 2nd chapter, that the highest, most glorious religion is the attainment of causeless, unmotivated devotional service. In pure devotional service, the only motive should be to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is not actually a motive. That is the pure condition of the living entity." So this is Prabhupada is very profound. I mean, he can, in a few words, he can say something that somebody could write a whole term paper about if they wanted to. Or could write a whole book on this theme, obviously. But he's saying that to be able to serve without any unmotivated, without any material motivation. I remember once in Vrindavan, Prabhupada was sitting in his room. He used to let us come to his room sometimes, and all of the devotees. And it was a long silence. Usually there was a lot of discussion going on, but in this case he was sitting very quietly for some time. And he was looking down, and then when he looked up he said, "Once there is motive," he said, "everything is spoiled." So, of course, he was referring to material motivation. Pure devotional service means without any material motivation. It says that the highest, most glorious religion is the attainment of causeless, unmotivated devotional service. But is there no motive in pure devotional service? Yes, there's a motive. It says the only motive should be to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And how do we know if we're pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead? That is, that we please Him through the chain of disciplic succession, by pleasing the spiritual master. That is considered to be pleasing the Supreme Lord. That's how we know how to please Krishna, through the disciplic succession, through our spiritual master. And Prabhupada says that is not a motive. It means that's not a material motive, that you're trying to please Krishna. He says that is not a motive, that is the pure condition of the living entity. In other words, when one has no other desire but to please Krishna, that means that he's on the platform of pure devotional service. That's the definition of pure devotional service. Further in this purport, Prabhupada writes, "To act under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master with a motive to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead is pure devotional service. But if one has a motive for personal sense gratification, his devotional service is manifested differently. Such a man may be violent, proud, envious, and angry, and his interests are separate from the Lord's." So in pure devotional service, the interest of the Lord and the interest of the devotee serving the Lord is one. That is oneness. The Vaishnava conception of oneness means that your desire, the spiritual master's desire, Krishna's desire, they're all one. They're one. They're one and the same. That's oneness. But a person that has some other desire, it says his interests are separate from the Lord's, therefore he's called a separatist. So perhaps to varying degrees, we may be in the separatist category. To some degree or another, we're in that category of being separatists. We have a desire to please the Guru and Krishna. We may have some other desires also. So here it's describing the consciousness of a person who is influenced by the mode of ignorance, though trying to practice sadhana bhakti. Then he goes on to say, one who approaches the Supreme Lord to render devotional service, but who is proud of his personality. Now this is interesting wording here. But who is proud of his personality envious of others, or vengeful, is in the mode of anger. He thinks that he is the best devotee. Devotional service executed in this way is not pure, it is mixed, and is of the lowest grade, tamasaha. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur advises that a Vaishnava who is not of good character should be avoided. So sometimes even someone may be in the dress of a Vaishnava and behaving as one, or trying to behave as one. His behavior may be tinged with these kinds of emotions. It says, proud of his personality, envious of others, or vengeful, or in the mode of anger, thinking that he's the best devotee. It says such persons can be avoided. So just as, you're supposed to try to pick your association carefully and associate with those who are more elevated. So if you find yourself with this type of association, it says it's better. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that should be avoided. Then it says, a Vaishnava is one who has taken the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the ultimate goal of life. But if one is not pure and still has motives, then he is not a Vaishnava of the first order of good character. One may offer his respects to such a Vaishnava because he has accepted the Supreme Lord as the ultimate goal of life. But one should not keep company with a Vaishnava who is in the mode of ignorance. So that kind of covers the mode of ignorance. Doesn't sound like it to be too good a situation to be in. One should obviously try to elevate himself from that platform. Then the next category, text 9, the worship of deities in the temple by a separatist with a motive for material enjoyment, fame, and opulence is devotion in the mode of passion. Here Prabhupada explains the word separatist. He says the word separatist must be understood carefully. The Sanskrit words in this connection are bhina dhrik and prithak bhava. A separatist is one who sees his interest as separate from that of the Supreme Lord. Mixed devotees, or devotees in the modes of passion and ignorance, think that the interest of the Supreme Lord is supplying the orders of the devotee. The interest of such devotees is to draw from the Lord as much as possible for their sense gratification. This is the separatist mentality. So that means approaching God as order supplier. My dear Lord, please give me this or that or the other. Please supply me with this. Please fulfill all of my material hankerings and desires. So this is a separatist mentality. That has got nothing to do with the interest of the Lord. That has to do with our own interest in the mode of passion. So it says here, the interest of such devotees is to draw from the Lord as much as possible for their sense gratification. This is the separatist mentality. It says, actually, pure devotion is explained in the previous chapter. The mind of the Supreme Lord and the mind of the devotee should be dovetailed. A devotee should not wish anything but to execute the desire of the Supreme. That is oneness. When the devotee has an interest or will different from the interest of the Supreme Lord, his mentality is that of a separatist. When the so-called devotee desires material enjoyment without reference to the interest of the Supreme Lord, or he wants to become famous or opulent by utilizing the mercy or grace of the Supreme Lord, he is in the mode of passion. Kind of like a person's, Krishna, please make me adored by everyone. Make me famous. Give me wealth. Let my opulence dazzle the world. So if one is thinking in a kind of a materialistic way, or even to bring it maybe more to home, like, let me be recognized as a great devotee, so others will bow down to me and recognize, how advanced I really am. So this sort of thinking is a kind of separatist mentality. So it says, when the so-called devotee desires material enjoyment without reference to the interest of the Supreme Lord, or he wants to become famous or opulent by utilizing the mercy or grace of the Supreme Lord, he is in the mode of passion. So he's very much influenced by passion. Even though his motive is to render devotional service, by the influence of this mode of passion, he may still be hankering for adoration, profit, and distinction. Also, the Mayavadis, Prabhupada comments on this in this particular purport and verse about the Mayavadis. He says they also interpret this word separatist, but in a different way. They say that while worshiping the Lord, one should think himself one with the Supreme Lord. This is another adulterated form of devotion within the modes of material nature. The conception that the living entity is one with the Supreme is in the mode of ignorance. So the Mayavadis here, their mentality is described to be influenced by the mode of ignorance. It says oneness is actually based on oneness of interest. A pure devotee has no interest but to act on behalf of the Supreme Lord. When one has even a tinge of personal interest, his devotion is mixed with the three modes of material nature. So as long as there is some personal motivation, personal desire for some type of sense gratification, even it may be subtle, then it says that means our devotion is still mixed. In the 10th verse, Prabhupada writes, this is the translation, when a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrieties of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. So in this purport, Prabhupada talks a little bit about Varnashram. He says that there are 8 different divisions of Varnas and Ashramas. And it says, and they have their respective duties to perform for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When such activities are performed and the results are offered to the Supreme Lord, they are called karmarpanam, duties performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. If there is any inebriety or fault, it is atoned for by this offering process. But if this offering process is in the mode of goodness rather than in pure devotion, then the interest is different. So that means that they're still acting to some degree in accordance with their own personal interests. It says, therefore such activities are in the mode of goodness, they cannot be counted in the category of pure devotion. Pure devotional service, as described by Rupa Goswami, is free from all material desires. Anya-bilashita shunyam. There can be no excuse for personal or material interest. Devotional activities should be transcendental to fruitive activities and empiric philosophical speculation, so free from gyan, free from karma and gyan. Pure devotional service is transcendental to all material qualities. Devotional service, now this is interesting also, this is devotional service in the modes of ignorance, passion, and goodness can be divided into 81 categories. So there's 81 categories of mixed devotion. He's not going to describe all 81, don't worry. There are different devotional activities such as hearing, chanting, remembering, worshiping, offering prayer, rendering service, and surrendering everything. And each of them can be divided into 3 qualitative categories. So there's hearing in the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, chanting in the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, and so forth. So he says, there is hearing in the mode of passion, in the mode of ignorance, and in the mode of goodness. Similarly, there is chanting in the mode of ignorance, passion, and goodness, etc. 3 multiplied by 9 equals 27. And when again multiplied by 3, it becomes 81. So then those subcategories can be further divided into 3. So altogether, it says it becomes 81 varieties. One has to transcend all such mixed materialistic devotional service in order to reach the standard of pure devotional service as explained in the next verses. So, in the final couple of verses that I'm going to go over, text 11 and 12, Prabhupada writes, the translation, the manifestation of unadulterated devotional service is exhibited when one's mind is at once attracted to hearing the transcendental name and qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is residing in everyone's heart. Just as the water of the Ganges flows naturally down towards the ocean, such devotional ecstasy, uninterrupted by any material condition, flows towards the Supreme Lord. So just as a river flows in an unbroken way, even if there is some obstacle, the river finds a way to get around it. Right. So just like that, one who is actually attracted to Krishna, his mind and his heart, it flows automatically in that direction. So, Prabhupada writes, a pure devotee's attraction for the transcendental name, form, and pastimes of the Supreme Godhead cannot be stopped by any material condition. The word avichinna, without interruptions, is very important in this connection. No material condition can stop the flow of the devotional service of a pure devotee. The word ahoitiki means without reason. A pure devotee does not render loving service to the personality of Godhead for any cause or for any benefit, material or spiritual. So he's not trying to get something, in other words. That's what it means. Without reason means without any material reason. No benefit. He's not after getting any particular benefit. His whole life and soul is to please the Lord, to please the Lord's pure devotee, to please the Vaishnavas. That's his whole heart and soul. This service, rendering service to great souls, this is the essence. It says here, this is the first symptom of unalloyed devotion. He has no desire, anya bilashita shunyam. He has no desire to fulfill by rendering devotional service. Such devotional service is meant for the Purushottama, the Supreme Personality, and not for anyone else. And then he writes, sometimes pseudo-devotees show devotion to many demigods, thinking the forms of the demigods to be the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead's form. It is specifically mentioned herein, however, that bhakti, devotional service, is meant only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, Vishnu, or Krishna, not for anyone else. So the word bhakti cannot really be applied to anyone but Krishna or his expansions. Avyavahita means without cessation. A pure devotee must engage in the service of the Lord 24 hours a day without cessation. His life is so molded that at every minute and every second he engages in some sort of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Another meaning of the word avyavahita is that the interest of the devotee and the interest of the Supreme Lord are on the same level. The devotee has no interest but to fulfill the transcendental desire of the Supreme Lord. Such spontaneous service unto the Supreme Lord is transcendental and is never contaminated by the material modes of nature. These are the symptoms of pure devotional service, which is free from all contamination of material nature. So, someone might question, well, what is the point of describing this incredibly elevated state? I'm nowhere near that. So, how does it help me to hear about, this exalted state of consciousness where one has no other motivation but the pleasure of the Guru and Krishna? Well, the point is to understand, sometimes people imagine themselves to be very elevated. It's to our benefit to remain in a humble position. If we still have material desires, then we should recognize that we're not on the platform of pure devotional service, but we may aspire to it by sincerely practicing. The whole point is that the practice of Krishna consciousness, the chanting of the holy name, it's by this method that we can actually become purified. And it may take some time. A lot of it depends, of course, on where you've taken up from your previous life. Some people have, I just remember the kind of humorous, in the early filming of 26 Second Avenue, when first devotees were coming to Prabhupada, Achyutananda was lying on his side talking to some reporter who was interviewing for the film. And he said, some people are very high on a low level. He said, but we're very low on a high level. So, in a sense, Practicing devotional service means you're in an elevated position. So, as the Chittana says, but we're very low on a high level. So we have to keep that understanding. We have to remember what we are. There are so many anarthas. Those are also extensively described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Specifically, they break down mainly into 3 categories, which we used to call pad. Someone who's afflicted by pad, profit, adoration, the desires for profit, adoration, and distinction. So to the degree that we still have sex desire, that we still have, and then the sex desire, that's a gross anartha. Then the subtle anarthas, they're a little trickier. Profit, adoration, distinction, to be distinguished, to be thought of as wonderful, to get some type of profit, to be adored or honored by others. So these things are very appealing to a conditioned soul. So as long as we are afflicted by some of these things, we have to try to keep a humble position. Understanding that only by the process of purification and by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Supreme Lord can these obstacles be removed. In New York once, Prabhupada was speaking about how one can come to the platform of pure Krishna consciousness. And he was explaining, he said, Krishna can remove all your obstacles. And at that time, he was sitting in the New York temple, this was in Brooklyn, and it was kind of dark outside because there were clouds that were obscuring the sun. But he said, Krishna can remove all of your anarthas, all of your obstacles. He said, just like this, and he waved his hand, and just as he waved his hand, the sun slid away from the cloud, and all this light came streaming into the room. So people were oohing and eyeing because they, thought maybe Prabhupada had orchestrated the cloud to move, which he may have. I don't know. Because, he could make a very dramatic gesture. It reminds me of another story. Once when he was in Gainesville, he was going to give a lecture outside to a big audience. And a lot of people had gathered to hear his talk. But there were clouds gathering, and it looked like it might rain. So the devotees were talking about moving the whole venue to another, indoors somewhere. And Prabhupada said, no. And he was indicating that they shouldn't move it because he figured if they moved, they would lose a lot of the people that were already there. So then he began to explain. He said, don't worry. He said, the clouds will go. And he started waving his hand like this. And the clouds actually went, and he gave his talk. So, this was witnessed by many devotees, so I have no doubt that he could definitely orchestrate the clouds if he wanted to. And but the point is that, in one sense, all of our endeavors are completely dependent on the mercy of the Guru and Krishna. If we please them, that's the whole oneness theme that we've been discussing or describing. That if we are simply, sincerely, to the best of our capacity, trying to please the spiritual master, obviously it's going to be defective. It's going to be mixed. It's going to be mixed service. Other motives will be there. But if we keep endeavoring sincerely and strongly to try to serve the desire of Krishna and the spiritual master, then we'll ultimately be successful. I was just thinking of a story. My godbrother Dayananda once told me this really wonderful story because it's poignant. Prabhupada was asking, sometimes he would ask his disciples for advice, which would be a peculiar position to be put into, but still he would sometimes ask them for advice. So he was saying, he said, what should we do next? And then he said, Dayananda, he said, what do you think? And Dayananda said, he said, Prabhupada, I don't know exactly what your desire is. And Prabhupada said, you do not know my desire? He said, my desire is to spread this Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. How can you ask such a question? So, it's very obvious, in a sense. It's quite obvious if we sometimes want to, if we want to make a mystery of it, that's another thing. But there's no great mystery about what Krishna wants. And it's certainly not what the spiritual master wants. He wants us to sincerely execute the principles of Krishna consciousness and try to help as many people as we can to become Krishna conscious. And that means rendering service. Serving the Vaishnavas, serving the interests of the conditioned souls who are stuck in the material world. That is our self-interest, and that interest, it is our self-interest because that interest is not different than Krishna's interest, not different than Guru's interest. Our real self-interest means to be in harmony with the interest of the spiritual master, the interest of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I mean, in one sense, of course, Mahaprabhu, in spreading this Sankirtan movement, that was only his secondary reason for coming to this world. But that's still, from our point of view, that is this Yuga Dharma, the chanting of the holy names. This is the key to not only our purification, but the purification of the whole world, the purification of not just this planet, but every planet. So that is the stress. Hare Krishna movement was a significant point that Prabhupada it was never called, something like the Prabhupada movement or anything like that. It was always the Hare Krishna. Well, Krishna was emphasized, the holy name of Krishna. Pleasing Krishna. And so in this age, that is the process, this chanting, spreading, not only chanting personally, of course we have to chant ourselves, gain some actual taste, and then when we preach to others, that bhakti will actually flow, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, from one congenial heart to another. If there is some bhakti there in the heart, then that will affect others. It's hard to give what you haven't got. So, to whatever extent we have it, then we can try to give it away. And by giving it away, we'll get more. So that's spiritual mathematics. That if you give it away, you get more. Generally, materially speaking, if you give something away, then you don't have anything. Or you don't have that thing anymore. But actually, bhakti is increased by trying to give it away, to give it to others. So, and that is simple. We just have to repeat what we've heard from our spiritual masters, what we've heard from Prabhupada's books. We repeat that. And of course, our individual intelligence is utilized in distributing. In other words, it's not hackneyed. It's not that you just become some kind of automaton and you repeat memorized sections out of Prabhupada's purports. Oh, quoting is good, but, not that you just become some kind of a tape recorder. Someone asks a question and you push the button and some spiel comes out. But one uses his creative intelligence to figure out how to speak to people in such a way to get the message across. All the acharyas have their own unique styles for presenting Krishna consciousness. If you read the writings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, or Prabhupada, they all have very distinct and different styles of presentation, different points of emphasis, but in essence, the message is exactly the same. So sticking to the essential message, we use our creative intelligence to present Krishna consciousness to others. So that is the way that we come to this stage, ultimately, of pure devotional service. Presently, we may be in the mixed category, but ultimately, if we sincerely follow and execute this process, gradually we become purified. And then when Krishna is merciful to us, or by the grace of Guru and Krishna, then all the obstacles, all of the anarthas within the heart are removed. So by our sincere endeavor in Krishna consciousness, to practice Krishna consciousness, gradually these anarthas, these obstacles, are removed from the heart, little by little. And ultimately, when Krishna decides that he's satisfied with our endeavors, then all the obstacles are removed in a moment. So really, in the end, it all just comes down to that. It comes down to somehow invoking the mercy of Guru and Krishna. And the best way to invoke it is to follow their instruction, follow their order. Make the order of the Guru one's life and soul. And then, you know, I always quote this thing because it was on my wall as a child. Of course, I had to give some purport because otherwise it sounds a little peculiar. Anyway, this was Abraham Lincoln. He said, I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I plan to keep on doing so until the end. If the end brings me out right, it will make no difference. And if the end brings me out wrong, 10,000 angels swearing I was right, it will make no difference. So, purport, he's saying that if you're doing the best you can, you can't do any better than that. So if you're trying your very best, however you come out, you know, you can't do any better than that. So you can't like go lamenting that, oh, I'm trying my best, but it's not good enough. No, your best is good enough. That's all that Krishna really expects. He says, I carry what they lack and preserve what they have. So if there's some lack, Krishna will cover it. If there's some lacking, despite your best heartfelt endeavor, then Krishna will cover whatever you lack. So we shouldn't worry too much about whether we're up to the task or not. If you're giving all you, just like that, you know, the story that I think Radhanath Maharaj mentioned it the last time about the spider who was trying to help build the bridge to Lanka, and he was kicking a few bits of sand and dirt into the ocean, and Hanuman more or less told him, look, you know, you're getting in the way. And Ram said, no. He said he's serving according to his capacity, and you're serving according to yours. So if you're serving according to your capacity, then Krishna will cover whatever deficit there may be there.